I never thought about these religions as like Abrahamic religions and Eastern religion, like trees. Like now it's so obvious to me that these are two very different looking
They have a
religions.
different theological base.
They have a very different theological base. That's so evident to me now. And like this is very interesting for me. Between Buddhism and Hinduism, which one is more older? Which one? How do they compare with each other? Or
So,
not necessarily compare with each other, but like what's the key ideas in them?
so first of all, Hinduism, came to know later on that Hinduism is a word that was coined by the British after they had colonized India. And it's quite funny because they couldn't find something to call to give a name to the religion of the people living in India, so
Yeah.
they called it Hinduism, right, for the sake of simplicity.
Interesting.
But it was never called the Indians themselves never called themselves Hindus
Oh, I didn't know that.
before the British, right? So because the British were the British were doing something interesting. They were trying to take concepts from Christianity or the framework they think about God and religion in Christianity and try to apply it to Hinduism. And because in Christianity there's the Bible, right?
Yeah.
And in India you have hundreds of books, right? And you have hundreds of gods. So how can you apply the framework of Christianity on the people of India and
Wow.
the location of India? Right, so then they thought, okay, so first we cannot agree that these cultures or these groups of people living in India, we cannot agree that they worship a certain god. Not in Christianity, okay, they worship Jesus. That's clear. Although with all the difficulties and understanding the Trinity, we can talk about that later. But at least there's a common core concept that we can rely on.
Yeah.
Whereas in Hinduism or the people of India, it was called Sanatan Dharma, the eternal teaching, right? Before the British called it Hinduism. And they tried to see, okay, so it's difficult to find God in Hinduism because there's like so many of them, right? Although Hinduism, I can argue, is a monotheistic religion, and this is something I can argue about. It's quite controversial, but I can explain that. They could not find a central figure just like Jesus in Christianity, right? And the second thing they could not find is a central book, because you have the Vedas, the Vedantas, the Upanishads, and the Bhagavad Gita. You have all these sacred books. However, there was no central book, just like in the Quran and the Bible. So they preferred to use the Bhagavad Gita because that was kind of the most authoritative, the most modern book compared to the other books. However, it was not the only one. So they struggled a lot in categorizing Hinduism.
So when you say that you can argue that Hinduism is a monotheistic religion, I'm just thinking based on what you're saying, could it be the case that maybe these ideas of like in that particular region, given that region historically has never ventured out of the Indian subcontinent, and I'll come back to that later, could it be that these communities developed a figure of God, and then these ideas sort of evolved from one community to the other community to the next community? Because India is a huge geography. Do you see that trend of one idea leading to another idea leading to another idea, or do all ideas in Hinduism happen in the same time frame or come from the same root basis? Or
it's very difficult to find a root basis for the religions of India.
but do they look like all these ideas are coming from one root basis, or they look like the gradual evolution of one another?
I would say gradual evolution. However, the way you understand the different gods in India is that each god symbolizes something, in a way, a certain value, a certain idea. Some of them are considered supreme in a way. For example, if you talk to someone who is part of the Krishna consciousness movement, they would say that Krishna is the central supreme God. What is the word? Supreme personality of Godhead. So you can say Krishna is the central figure. However, it's very definitely it has evolved over the years, especially when the Muslims also entered India. You'll see a lot of influence came from the Muslims, specifically on Sikhism. Sikhism is extremely monotheistic, and they say that there is only one God. You see the influence of Islam on Sikhism. However, they combine Hinduism and Islam in a very interesting way. So,
Interesting.
yeah, you would see the influence of Islam, not much the influence of Christianity. However, you do see the influence of Islam. And of course, talking about Hinduism is very complex, and it's easier to talk about a case in point, specifically because there are so many of them. Right? If you go to the south, there are different gods, and if you go to the north, there are different gods and different ideas and different books. You know, in Buddhism, it's easy. It's not easy, it's easier. Let's say it's easier because at least we know certain books that we can rely on to get the Buddhist teaching.
Yeah.
We know who is the central figure of Buddhism. We know the story, at least tentatively. At least we don't necessarily know it historically.
Yeah.
In terms of like the details of the facts, but we know where to start.